Well, good evening, everybody, and it's wonderful to have you back with us again at the Marketplace Forum. If you've been tracking with us, you'll know that this is the third time that we've gotten together. And if it's your third time, you'll know that what we're about is we're about investigating, we're about looking at, digging into the Word of God to find out what kingdom marketplace leadership really looks like. And if you've been following us, you'll know that we are there to disciple, to equip, to connect, and to mobilize. And so this evening, it's so good to have you back with us again. And tonight we have two very, very special guests. It's actually our very, very first husband and wife team, Bernard and Tracey Swanepoel, maybe a sign of things to come. Guys, welcome.
Thanks, Dorian. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Dorian. It's really great to be part of this amazing initiative of you and your team. So thank you for inviting us.
Well, thank you, guys. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. Before we climb into our topic for tonight, which is kingdom leadership, just a reminder that this forum works really on two different levels. We've got this where we go live on Monday evenings. And for now, we're going out weekly on Monday evenings to kind of just set the tone and establish some of the biblical principles. But to really get the most out of a forum like this, it's important that we have things that we can do centrally and things that we can do right down at the congregational level as well. And you will have noticed before we started that I put up a list of names of some of the congregations that are running smaller marketplace forums. And that's where guys are getting together to say, well, listen, it's one thing hearing, it's one thing being taught this stuff, but how do we actually grapple with it? And so I want to encourage you, if you're close to one of those congregations or you would like to get one going within your congregation, then just get in touch with us, let us know, and we'll put your details up on the forum as well. And in fact, we're going to put those contact details into the descriptions once this video is, after we've gone live and this video is then placed on the website. So if you guys know who I am, possibly most of you do, my name's Dorian. I'm one of the local, although I serve as the managing director of Umbono Capital. I'm also one of the elders and pastors at Every Nation in Rosebank. And I love the church, but primarily God's called me into the marketplace. And for a while now, we've been sensing God say, we need to be better equipped. We need to understand that call in our lives as marketplace leaders. And so, tonight, as I said, we've got Bernard and Tracey with us, and I'm going to ask them to each say a few words, but let me just brag about them a little bit. Bernard, mining engineer, started out his life in the mining industry, went through a number of different roles, eventually ended up as the CEO of Harmony Gold, where he spent 10 years as the CEO of Harmony. And then eventually when his time was up there, he left and he started a consulting practice called To The Point. A lot of the reason where we are as we are in a company as Umbono was because one day when we were chatting to Bernard, he turned to us and he said, when are you guys going to stop talking and start playing? And it's amazing, but that to me is an example of leadership because right there he planted a seed that that's borne amazing fruit since then. So Bernard, thank you, man.
You're welcome. You remember it a bit different to me, and I just thought that these consultants come and tell me how to do things, and perhaps they should go and do it themselves. So I'm glad it called out the best in you.
Thank you. And then of course Bernard is joined by his beautiful wife Tracey, and but Tracey, I've just been so impressed ever since I've known Tracey. There's something about her that just gets to the core of what's critical and what's important. Tracey is a Henley MBA graduate. She's the founder of Thinkspiration, which is a specialist consultancy group. And she focuses on leadership development and really helping leadership teams get to the core of what makes for good leadership. Tracey's written a book called The Leadership Riptide and How to Escape This. And it was published in 2016. And I believe she's busy writing another one now, and maybe she'll tell us a bit more about that later. But one thing people don't really know about Tracey, she was a very, very keen tennis player at one stage in her life. And I know that kind of took an interesting part in your life. So Tracey, it's so good to have you with us.
Thanks, Dorian. Thanks for having me. You do take me back to the ancient days when you mention that. The old bones and joints are not as young as they used to be. So yeah, it's long ago.
And then, of course, guys, before we get into it today, we got Sam Okarossi moderating again. Thank you, Sam. Dave Porter going to be on Q&A. And so if if you've got any questions, please punch them right into the chat facility there. And Dave will be collating those and getting them to us on WhatsApp for a little later in the session. And then, of course, we've got Charles in the background, making sure that everything goes out right on the live stream. And so we trust, because we don't actually know, but we trust that everything's coming out to you guys loud and clear at this moment. So Bernard and Tracey, I mean, stage 5 of lockdown behind us, stage 4 in progress. What's it been like for the Swanepoels?
So we decided to be locked down on our farm, which is like 60 kilometers north of Polokwane. There are days when we wonder whether that was a smart decision. This is where we sat with Zach, our son, and we watched our president make his announcements and his speeches. And I must say, what inspirational leadership that has been. And I know we all are getting a bit tired of this sort of detail, but I think when we talk about leadership, we should acknowledge leadership when we see it. And it was amazing to saw President Ramaphosa take a nation into his confidence, take us where we've never been, make us do things we never thought we would do. And I think the surroundings has really given us, me personally, an amazing opportunity to reflect. I suspect everybody on this program tonight has had time to reflect. We were forced to reflect. Our normal routine was dramatically disrupted. And I think we all sit and say, what is next? And I mean, already we see products like this one that you are busy with, which is the next phase of God's calling in your life. And we all have to think that. But, you know, I'm involved in quite a few businesses as an owner mostly. And we had to rethink every one of our businesses. You know, some of them we had to pause, perhaps permanently. You know, they may actually not survive. We've had our hands full trying to make one of our larger businesses, a manganese refinery in Nelspruit, survive against all odds. And we also found time to start a new business, because that's what happened when you pause and reflect and say, what happens post this sort of all. And I'm learning more about leading differently and remotely than what I've learned in my first almost 40 years of being in sort of supervisory sort of role. So lockdown will be, I mean, it will be in all of our lives. It will be that time which we reflect on and say, wow, it was pre-lockdown and post-lockdown, Dorian. So sorry for the long answer, but it has been 5 weeks, so things have happened, or 6 weeks, is it? Yeah.
No, Bernard, I mean, wow, that's so insightful. And I think you're quite right. And maybe we'll get a chance to circle back on our president's actions, and I know that he's coming in for a bit of criticism right now. And is that valid or not? It would be worth reflecting. But I agree with you. I've been really impressed by the decisiveness by which he said lives matter. And that's what matters mostly. But maybe we can get to that a little later. Maybe there'll be a few questions on that. Trace, what's lockdown been like for you?
Well, it's interesting, Dorian, because, it's this beautiful, idyllic surroundings. I hate to tell everybody out there, but we have been able to walk and run whenever we want to, at any time. Okay, sorry. Yeah. But so you've got this gorgeous place that we usually experience complete rest and peace and holiday. But internally, it's like this roller coaster, this emotional roller coaster. As Bernard says, it's businesses that we're involved in, we're part of, clients that are actually fighting for survival. And obviously, when I say businesses, it's actually people that are fighting for survival. So I think I feel like I'm on this emotional roller coaster. I think I've had more heart-to-heart, very emotional conversations with people now than I've ever had. So it's almost, this contrast of this physical distance where we actually don't really see anybody except sort of the animals out there. But these very emotional, heart-to-heart, deep conversations, which obviously lead you to reflect. I'm also, as you know, busy with my next book. And as anyone who writes knows, it's a terrible, terrible thing to have time and space to just write, because there's no distraction. So I'm battling with that, but I'm getting there. I'm making good progress. So I must say it's been an interesting time, and every day is different in terms of all the sort of internals and the emotional side of things.
Good. Well, I hope the book's going well, Trace. And I'm not sure if you have a title for it yet, but I know that that can often be the one that's the most tricky to put together in a book.
The thing is, for me, the title is the very last thing that you do. So no, I don't have a title. It's similar to the previous one. It's really about how to put inspirational leadership into practice. How do we practice it on a daily basis? So yeah.
Look, sounds very exciting. So
Thanks.
maybe to both of you, I mean, I think people can Google and find out about your professional experience, but I don't know how many people know about your walk with the Lord and where that started and how that's changed the way you think about things. Bernard, maybe you can kick that off for us.
Yeah, and I'll try and sort of link it back to tonight's topic of leadership, because, I'm blessed to have a mother who's been a role model of servant leadership and serving the Lord. My life, I grew up with a church-going mother, a believer, a woman who's saved, and a woman who serves like, what was it, Mother Teresa, dare I say. And I mean, it's absolute sort of inspirational. And I never had any aspirations or expectation, quite frankly, to become a leader. That was not where I grew up. I was never a school prefect, the rugby captain. And so when I studied mining engineering, because that was literally the bursary I could get, my first day on the mines, I was put in charge of people. I had to lead a team. That was the model of the sort of days, as the white mining engineer, the crew of people you had to work with were typical sort of black migrant workers. And I had to spend a lot of time with myself, with the Lord, asking, how did this happen? Where is this taking me? Nothing in me has prepared me for this. And I do think, there are times when you really just trust that the Lord is walking a path with you, which is meant for you. But then obviously you have to deal with the skills you need to require to actually work with that. Also, perhaps the way I got into leadership unexpectedly was I observed practices and things that I thought, this can't be right. And I mean, if you just go back, but today in organizations, hierarchy, the boss is important and always right, the falseness of it all, it's so paternalistic, I don't think any of that sits, in the Bible. I don't think that's how God wants us to be as people and as people with each other. And why would he want us to be different in the sort of marketplace? And so I have to say, from probably 40 years ago, without giving my age away, although I'll be turning 59 tomorrow, day after, in 40 years, I really had to lean heavily on the Lord. Times that he shouted and I could not hear, and times that I was close enough to him that he could whisper. And that's really been, I think, the sort of walk in the marketplace. It's so easy to not hear the Lord. It's always easy to hear the Lord if we are open to it, Dorian. So if I link that journey with my leadership story, perhaps that is where I would want to sort of leave it right now.
Beautiful, Bernard. And I think that point about we're always able to see what leaders are doing badly above us. Maybe how we lead from the bottom up might be something interesting if people have questions in that area for a bit later. And Tracey, how about you? I mean, know the Lord all your life?
Yeah, most of it. I think when I was 10 years old, my dad died, a very traumatic event, and I was very lucky with where I was. I was at a Catholic school, and the nuns and the priests and the people there really just surrounded our family and just role modeled what love is like and held us. So from there on, I think that's where it really started. And I think that there are various things that happen to you in your life where your path changes a little bit. As you know, I was on a tennis scholarship in America, and then I got a back injury, and that sort of ended that. And then you've got to realize that, God has other plans. Your plans are there, but God's actually got other plans for you. And I remember actually probably like the end of 2012, I'd been working obviously for quite a long time then. And 2012, I remember being in praise and worship at Rosebank, actually. And it's such a clear memory, because I remember just getting these words that I must partner with God to help people to think differently about their work life.
Yes.
And I was those were the words. It was just so clear. And I didn't really even relate it to leadership or what I'm doing now. I had worked a lot in lots of different industries, in mining and in advertising, and via that, had exposure to lots of different businesses. But one thing that had always broken my heart was when I could see that people were unhappy. I could see that people at work were unfulfilled, were not living their potential, were not playing to their strengths. That always would almost make me sort of tearful. That there's that great saying about a great quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes about people going to their graves with their music still inside them. And that just always, so I realized that it's somewhere there. Often when you look back, you look back on all the things that you had to do and go through. It wasn't clear at the time, but it's very clear now, because there's so much that I use of all the things that I've experienced. So, God has always got a plan, even when we can't see it, as we're going through it. Since I sort of put my sort of thoughts into words, wrote my book, it's become a lot clearer for me. And I think now, I wake up every morning and I'm really excited and passionate about changing the world of work, helping leaders to lead better. And really the sort of area is putting it into practice. How do we practically do things better?
Tracey, that's so inspiring, because I guess how many of us have got stories of those individual people that at certain points in our life were there for us, said something, did something, and made such a difference in our lives, like the nuns you were referring to earlier when your father died. Yeah. And I think it's just such an encouragement and such a challenge at the same time for us just to say, let's be ready and let's be aware of who's around us, because those words can have lasting, life-changing impact in the lives of others. And absolutely, one of the most rewarding things ever is when I'm stopped by somebody, some people that I don't even really know well, and they go, Dorian, do you remember? And this could be 15 years ago. And sometimes I can barely remember, but when they say that changed my life. And I'm sure all of us have got stories like that. And I think it's just something we should just really be aware of, what God's doing and using us in even the smallest of moments.
Exactly.
So in leading up to this discussion, this topic of kingdom leadership, and the two of you will know we've been kind of bouncing it around, but the thing that was kind of bouncing in my mind leading up to this was the Word of God really is a book about leadership from cover to cover. And generally, it's filled with some amazing examples of leadership, generally linked to men and women of God that were following God's heart, following his purpose, and were instrumental in bringing about breakthrough and salvation to many, many people. And then, of course, it's filled with some terrible examples of leadership. You don't have to, and these are normally linked to evil people, like Pharaoh and Jezebel. And, it always ends badly for them. But unfortunately, it ends badly for them and a whole lot of people that blindly follow their bad leadership. And of course, the question comes up, is good leadership equivalent to kingdom leadership? In other words, is kingdom leadership just good leadership? And bad leadership just not kingdom leadership? Or is there more to it? And I guess that's one of the things that have been bouncing around in my mind. And I'd love us to kind of circle back onto that at the end of this discussion, to ask ourselves and just revisit that. Is kingdom leadership, good leadership, one and the same thing? But before we get there, maybe we can just kick this off now, the meat of the discussion, by just kind of saying, well, if I asked you, the two of you, about any of, the most aha moments in leadership, those most significant points, maybe you've mentioned it already, I don't know, but what comes to mind when I say, do you have an aha leadership moment to reflect on?
Dorian, I'm a slow learner, so I've had about 100 aha moments. But my first one was truly that first day that as a youngster, I was put in charge of a team of adult men, and I was expected to be their leader, and nothing prepared me for it. I was their boss. I was their supervisor. I could give them instructions in a harsh and, dare I say, quite sort of challenging and even unsafe sort of environment. And what struck me was how deeply these people care for the very company that you could argue were probably sort of exploiting them. Some of those conversations in the change house with other miners, which was the sort of lowest level of sort of white supervisors at the time, were deep conversations, caring. There was an authenticity. And I could never move on without remembering that there is nobody in an organization who doesn't want to belong, who doesn't actually have an opinion, a view, and sometimes better, more sincere, more authentic views than the top. And then obviously later in life, I had the amazing privilege to get one of those R1 million phone calls from Zelda Legrandsie inviting me to come and have a cup of tea with Madiba. And that's too long a story. Obviously, first I didn't think it was really him. I thought it was Wackett or Leon Schuster setting me up for a prank call. Then I put the phone down. I immediately phoned back. And when she answered again, I thought, okay, this was probably, really Madiba, because she phoned me and then said, hold on, the president wants to speak to you, And next thing, Madiba spoke in his typical sort of voice. And to cut a very long story short, later that day, I had to delay our appointment because I was running late. I was in Cape Town on a roadshow. And I had to phone back, and she put me through to Madiba not to apologize, to inform him that I'm going to not make 4 o'clock. And from that moment on, everything in our interaction was him, the humble leader. Him saying, you're the busy businessman. I've all the time in the world, I can wait, When we got to see him and I asked him, can my colleagues please come and meet him? He posed for pictures with us. He spoke with us. And 18 months later, when we re-met at the opening of the Adams College, which we sponsored, he asked me how my twins were, my daughters. Now, I mean, what a privilege. What a privilege to meet such humility, and what a privilege to meet somebody who cares so deeply that he knows detail about me and thousands of other people, and he truly knows it. So between those sort of like down at the bottom, what we define as the bottom, are real people, people who are actually capable of contributing. And then when you go and you meet right at the top, a world icon, you find profound humility. I mean, I would say of the sort of many aha moments, those two would forever stay with me.
Humbling, Bernard. Thank you.
So Dorian, mine, I remember sort of end of 2014, we were doing an intervention with a big coal mining company. And part of what we do when we do that is we conduct listening sessions. So one-on-one chats, really, with people at all levels to understand what they think about the company, because often that's where the greatest ideas always are. So I was having a chat with a coal miner, literally a miner. And he was sort of quite, like this had never happened to him before, so he was quite reticent and sort of on his nerves, got him to relax. And eventually we got to sort of the meat of the discussion. And I said to him, so what is it that keeps you awake at night? And often when you ask that question, it's usually, when I have a job, I want my bonus, my family, it's those sort of things. So this guy sort of really thought about it, and he said, what I really battle with, what keeps me awake at night, is how do I get my people to do what I need them to do? I've got 20 guys on my crew, and I need to get them to do what they must do, and I don't know how to do that. So I said to him, well, how do you do it now? So he said, no, I don't want to tell you. So I said, no, you can tell me, it's between us, confidential. He never knew the story would go on YouTube one day, but anyway. So he said to me, how I get them to do what I want them to do is I shout and I scream and I often swear at them. So I said to him, well, and how does that work? How does that working out for you in an obviously very compassionate way, not sarcastic? And he said, it doesn't work. So I said to him, but why do you do it? And he said, because that is what my boss does. And I drove out of that meeting. I drove all the way back from Secunda, and I thought somehow we have to fix the system. It's deeply entrenched, and we have to actually change the way leaders lead on a daily basis.
Guys, just both of what you have said is just, it's inspiring in its simplicity. Because, I'm not sure that leadership books 20, 30 years ago would have come out with humility, would have come out with, doing anything different than what you see being done, by your boss. And yet it's so obvious when you stop and you think about it. And I guess what we're seeing, that modern leadership, which includes things like humility, includes things like influence, is almost, they've been in the word for generations. And MBA, business schools, science seems to be kind of catching up at last.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
If you were to define leadership, because I always think it's good for us to kind of get into definitions before we kind of get to, how would you define it? Tracey, how would you define leadership?
So, Dorian, for me, it's not, let me start by saying what it's not. It's not the title. It's not the reserved parking spot. It's not your place on the organogram. For me, leadership is completely and utterly about influence. If you have the ability to influence one other person, even if it's only yourself, you are a leader. So that's my one thing. Secondly, I actually think leadership is about love, because it's about, if you care for someone enough to go where they are, because to influence someone, you have to go to where they are. You have to stand in their shoes. You've got to love them to do that. And you've got to actually care enough to take them with you. And the last thing, I guess, for me, again, it's the practical angle. Leading happens while you're doing other things. It happens every day, every moment, every phone call, every meeting. So yeah, that's really what covers it for me.
And Tracey, if I could ask you to expand on that, because our title this evening was, let's not waste a good crisis, which I know there's a lot of debate about who said it originally, but let's not worry about that right now. But do you think that this current crisis that we're dealing in, like the title suggests, there's an opportunity for us right now?
Oh, absolutely, Dorian. I think this is the moment where we can really change things in terms of leadership. I think it's that unfreeze moment. Look, let's face it, we were hardly shooting the lights out before Corona in terms of leadership in the world of work. It's not like things were going brilliantly there. So I think this is the moment to say, we need to change things. And because it's a crisis, we need to recalibrate. We need to, work out how to do the Zoom thing. So there's a whole lot of opportunities to be a lot more human, to discover other things. And I really think this is I think what's happened in leadership is it's not like we haven't known what to do. We've known neuroscience, there's been a lot of work done. What kind of environments bring out the best in people? Well, actually, we know what that is. Totally different, incidentally, to what a lot of the common practices in businesses are. But there's never been that moment to say, well, let's change this. We actually have to change this. And this is what I think this where we are now, this crisis provides us with that opportunity.
Bernard, do you have anything further to add on that? Given that we're now in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, I think Tracey's 100% right. It wasn't like we were, world leaders. But what do you think it provides for us now?
Yeah, Dorian, you should never make a man speak after his wife. I have to be another 35 days in lockdown with this amazing woman. So, my definition of leadership, obviously, somebody needs to make sense, like President Ramaphosa did for us about the lockdown, But it's also so critical that leaders give hope and direction. Again, that's what we all want. There are times when, when we just want to know that, things will one day be normal again. Now, of course, as Christians, we've got the word, we've got God, we follow Jesus. But in a lockdown, we also need to know there's a plan to come out of it. How will it work, and so on? And leaders can do that, especially by example. The way they behave, can actually make things easier for us and inspire us. Sometimes leaders just need to take the first step, because we have no certainty. We don't know what the future holds, and people want to follow. People who want to follow need somebody to take this sort of first step. And I think, as you and Trace alluded to, listen, the world was not such a great place. Corporate leadership, You can be celebrated for false things. You can be celebrated for your share price, your earnings. You can be. I so clearly remember presenting in New Orleans, in New York. I mean, huge conference, a gold conference, standing room only, standing applause at the end, people queuing to speak to me. And you know what? Back in Welkom, I was a villain. The people who worked for Harmony were not so impressed with my leadership style. So how do you deal with that? And that is, I think, where we're going. Is unless you discover, the biblical and godly principles, and unless you lead in the right way, I think you can achieve false success in some instances.
Bernard, again, well, so challenging, because, and I think you're so right. I think what the last 5 weeks have probably created is an opportunity to just pause and reflect and say, well, how am I doing? Are people following me because I'm inspiring them? Use Tracey because I'm loving them and I'm influencing them? Or are they following me because they don't have a choice? And maybe they really don't have a choice now. And really, when we look at the Word of God, it's never about follow me because I said so. It's follow me as you see me follow Christ. That's what Paul was saying. Follow me when you see God in me and you see his principles in me and his life in me and his love in me as you see me following Christ. Maybe now is a good time for us to actually talk about kingdom leadership. And I think there's been aspects of it that have already come out. But if we were to specifically say, what does kingdom leadership specifically mean to each of you? I mean, are there deeper things that come to mind or additional things that come to mind?
When I reflected on that, obviously the biblical model, Jesus's model, is the model of servant leadership. We a few weeks ago looked at John 13. Jesus washing the feet of his disciples well, we used to call it a connect group, but I think it's now a cell group, seeing that we locked down. So in our connect group, we discussed that. I mean, can you imagine? So will you wash their feet? What is the modern day cultural sort of equivalent of that? Put yourself down in the lowest possible serving position if you're a leader, because clearly Jesus was a leader and his followers fully accepted that he was a leader. I mean, for me, again, the sort of kingdom principles is around purpose. Jesus was fulfilling God's plan for people and for himself. The purpose of making the world a better place, and this is why it's such a privilege to walk next to Tracey and her purpose, and play off that to some extent, because clearly we were not meant to have hell on earth and one day things will be better. We need to bring kingdom to earth, and surely that's in the leadership model as well. I mean, for me, the biblical model and the kingdom principle is authenticity. I don't think we are expected to be something different. There's no role model. We don't need to be like somebody else. We need to be more like God wanted us to be. And I always have found from years ago when Tracey introduced it into my life. So Jesus preached to thousands and he spent amazing time with 12 disciples. And I think the discipleship model actually has got a practical application in our businesses as well, So if we spend enough time with few people, we'll create people who really, really can expand what we do. We don't have to do it all ourselves at all times. So, Dorian, obviously there are many more, but I think sort of 4 profound ones from for me personally, as sort of kingdom principles.
And Bernard, I just love that because there's no doubt that when it comes to kingdom leadership, it's based in serving. It's serving others. And I love the fact that you threw authenticity in at the end, because so many times people will say, I'm here to serve you. But you can sense, I mean, if someone is really serving you, or whether they're using that to serve themselves, but they're saying the right things. And so I think serving, I mean, absolutely purpose. I mean, not about what I want, but what God wants. What is God's plan for my life? What is God's plan for my company? What is God's plan for my employees? What is God's plan for their life? And then the authenticity, because if it's not authentic, then it's not God at all. I mean, a lot to think about. Tracey, I don't know. I mean, is it easier to follow after Bernard? I mean, I know he said it was hard to follow after you.
I have to say it's really hard to speak after that, because I'm in lockdown with this guy. So no, it really is. I have to say I love all of those points. I think just to add to the authenticity point, we are so caught up in the world with role models, like we should be more like Steve Jobs, we should be more like Elon Musk or Bill Gates, or and I think just to add on to the authenticity point, we need to find out how we need to be the best, how God wants us to be. That's where we need to start looking. So we need to find out a lot more about the leader that we need to be, rather than sort of pinning our sort of stakes on other people out there. So just to add to that, Dorian, there's so many, for me, it's just, the template for kingdom leadership, it's in the Bible. And when you look at what's there, and you also look at what comes out, to be scientifically proved, what brings out the best in people, everything overlaps. It's like a perfect overlap. So we could talk about this all night, but I want to highlight 3 areas that I think, are helpful to look at. And I think for me, the first one is for leaders to use stories to communicate. That's the first one. And then the second one is to how we focus on strengths to energize people. The third one is how we need to use empathy and emotional intelligence to connect with people. So if I go to the stories one first. So now, the biggest problem, I think, in leadership, or one of the biggest problems, is how do we get our messages to stick? So we spend hours, coming up with 100 PowerPoint slides, and all those bullet points, and people look at them and they walk out of there and they don't remember a thing. I mean, that's kind of, common practice. So it's a waste of time. How do we get our messages to stick? How do we really influence people? Now, Jesus is the greatest communicator that ever walked the earth. And he uses stories all the time. So, parables, analogies. One that particularly stands out for me as a real masterclass is the parable of the Good Samaritan. So Jesus is talking about the 2 commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. And then there's this expert in the law that says, who is my neighbor? Now you can just hear nitpicky, detail, and what would be our response in that situation would be, I am going to define you out of this argument. I'm going to give you the facts. I'm going to give you the thesaurus version of neighbor here. Okay. Jesus does something completely different. He uses a story. And at the end of that story, he says, now, what do you think? Which actually is unbelievable, because there you have it. The guy says, well, I can see that it's the Good Samaritan, and he owns the solution. So I'm just, there is a beautiful template of why stories are such powerful ways of communicating right there. So stories as number one. Number 2, for me, is to focus on people's strengths, to know and focus on our strengths, and to, as leaders, actually call that out of people, call out gifts, talents. God created each one of us uniquely. As little fingerprints. I always think of that image in my head. So we have a unique imprint to make on the world. And I think, as all of us are different. And I think one of the sort of evils of the corporate world is that it forces us into boxes. It's like we all have to be the same. We all have to have performance management systems that measure us the same. Everybody needs to be, at the same level. That is not good. It breeds competition. It breeds a toxic environment. So I think Leaders need to actually understand people's strengths, and particularly in a time like this, in a time of crisis, when we are emotionally exhausted, when we need to be energized, this is what we need to use, because everybody's different. People react differently. So to understand our own strengths and understand the people that we're working with strengths creates energy. When you're in a place of strength, you grow, you're energized, you're encouraged. So I think particularly at a time like this, and obviously you then can get teams to work well together. You can get teams to actually, say, listen, that's not my area. Can you do that? So that's really for me something that leaders need to do in terms of strengths. And then lastly, on I don't know what you call it really. It's empathy, it's EQ, it's emotional intelligence. I think this is where we really need to go. I think, and this is where I think, again, going back to sort of let's not waste a good crisis. What we're seeing here is that people are human beings. I think this whole Zoom thing of, and actually you've got a life, your husband walks past you, your kids run around you, it's actually, we're not stormtroopers. We're not just one-dimensional beings that I'm the accountant that does the spreadsheet. So I think, understanding that the whole human being, and as a leader, understanding where people are coming from and leading them, using emotions to connect with them, saying, you know what, I'm not feeling so great either. I'm also feeling uncertain and frightened and worried. But how can we get through this together? I think that's where we need to go. And again, the biblical model is there. I mean, Jesus experienced every emotion that we experience. So I think that just speaks for itself.
And Tracey, I just love it again. I mean, I'm actually blown away, to be honest, though. I mean, just how every single one of those three are just rooted in the Word of God. I'm sure if you ask the pastors that are listening to the stream, the best sermons, it's going to be ones where they were sharing authentic stories, and people remember those. The sermons I remember from over the last 30 years are the ones where I remember the stories that were told, and yet it's something that we don't use often enough. And then the strengths, I mean, it's so clear. Jesus said he gives us all different amount of strengths and talents, and he says, use them. And I'm going to ask you how well you did them. And I know all of us want to work on our weaknesses, but why? That is just so profound. Maybe we should be less concerned about our weaknesses and focus more on our strengths. Not when we are being bad people, okay? I mean, there's things we've got to repent, but let's repent. But maybe we should be less hung up about the fact that, maybe my financial modeling is not as strong as my motivational encouragement is, and let's focus on those. And then, of course, your empathy one. 1 Corinthians 13, the whole chapter on love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is long-suffering. I mean, that's empathy. That's EQ. Okay, so MBAs, now we call it empathy and EQ, etc. But if you go back to 1 Corinthians 13 and you apply that stuff to your leadership, to your life, to your relationships, you're going to be pretty high on EQ.
Very much so.
So I guess the question now is, before we go to Q&A, is if I would ask you what's the opportunity we've got now? We're in this pandemic, we're in this crisis, but so what is the opportunity? What can we do differently, and what should we be looking to do differently?
So Dorian, I think we got stripped away from our false sense of being in control. We actually start to believe in our spreadsheets and our forecasts, and we think, therefore, we are in control. We are not. Absolutely everything is uncertain. It's a completely different, uncertain world. I think as Christians, we fall back on the Word. We fall back on, we believe in God. God is in control. But when it comes to the planning, the detail, we still need to move forward, and so we need to do that differently. If ever there's been a time not to be false, to be authentic and real, I've said it, I'll repeat it, now's the time. I mean, people want to see that you are scared, that you don't know. They want to hear that you perhaps cried in desperation. I mean, I really think, and perhaps I speak especially to men here, I think we actually need to show our heart, And as a leader, you need to be available, but differently. I mean, I love my trips to Zimbabwe, to mine. I serve on the board. I love my trips to Nelspruit, to our manganese business. I can't go there. And yet I need to be available and I need to be visible, you know. And through all of this, I had to really, really dig deep to show I care. Yes, I care, but of course I care. Now I have to actually work hard to show I care and make absolutely sure that it is real and authentic. So, I mean, like I say, what amazing opportunities in this crisis for me to develop my own leadership style, skill, hone some of the things I knew worked, but I wasn't perhaps doing it as well as I should.
So good, Bernard. I mean, you can't walk in and just, pat someone on the back. You've got to find ways of doing that, because they probably need it more now than they did back then. But how do you do it? You can't walk into the room. Challenging. And Tracey, with this new way we're doing stuff, I mean, if we weren't in lockdown, we'd probably be sitting around a table somewhere and maybe talking to people in a room. But now Zoom has become a way of life. I mean, practical ways that we can get better at leading?
Well, I think that's, we have to, a lot of the conversations that we're having, it sensitizes us to how we connect. So we wouldn't even think about it, as you say, if we were having a conversation around a table or in a room. But I think that what happens here, the opportunity is to have conversations at a different level. I've got a guy that I've started having conversations with now during this lockdown time. He's the COO of one of our clients, very technical business. I wouldn't have, and we wouldn't have had those conversations that we're having now. He calls me once a week and we chat about how it's going, how he's feeling, it's not about technical stuff at all. The opportunity is actually for him to talk about that. And he says, he said to me, I'm feeling undone. I'm disappointed. I don't know where I'm going to get my energy from. And I don't know what to say to that. So I just share. Well, I've also had moments like that, and I share those moments. And in that process, at the end of the conversation, he'll say to me, you know what? I feel so much better. I just needed to share that with someone. So the opportunity is get closer. The opportunity is share emotions. I always think of that quote by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that, I think, is our leadership opportunity collectively in this.
Very, very good. Before we go into some Q&A, Bernard, any final thoughts from you on any practical next steps or, advice for us at this time?
Dorian, I shared with you a slide which you may, perhaps if you can share it on the screen. It's just I got it off Twitter, and I can't credit why CEO who wrote it. But I think in these times, if you're a leader, especially if you're like a boss leader, like, the main dude or dudette, I think, when I read this, I thought, I wish I said this. Nah. So what the CEO said to his people is, you're not working from home. You're at home during a crisis trying to work. Now, have that attitude with your people, because it is true. This is how most people are experiencing. Your personal, physical, mental, emotional health is the most important thing right now. Take care of yourself. Have you said that to any of the people in your team? You should not try to compensate for lost productivity by working extra hours. Those 3 o'clock emails, 3 o'clock in the morning emails should be raising an alarm that your people are not coping, especially people with younger kids at home, can I say. Be kind to yourself. Don't judge yourself on how you are coping based on how other people seems to be coping. Remember on Facebook, everybody is doing fine, eh? Be kind to others and don't judge others and how they are coping based on how you are coping. Success will not be measured the same way when things were normal. If you're going to do a normal performance management in this time, you're going to destroy people. And then obviously we'll get through this. So I thought, I can't say it better than this. And that's why this comes off Twitter from some other CEO, which wasn't credited. But what wise wisdom for critical and crisis times like this. Thank you for sharing that on the screen, Dorian.
Bernard, no, and I remember when you sent that through to us, I think it was during one of our Connect group sessions, I think a week or so ago. It was just profound, because it made each of us, all of the men that happened to be part of that session, I think, stop and say, Lord, how are we leading? Are we considering, are we thinking about those that are following us? So, folks, we've been, Bernard and Tracey, I don't know if you've got your WhatsApp there. There are a few questions that have been coming through. Bernard, here's a comment that was made. I'm just gonna put it out there the way it came in. It says, Bernard, you're a righteous provocateur. Please comment. Maybe Tracey should comment on that one.
I will comment on that. I will have to, she's going to go, what is a provocateur?
Yeah, I don't speak French. Is it Fanagalo? I don't know what it is. No, I do think, quite honestly, I think we're actually meant to challenge, and hopefully we challenge from a kingdom principle sort of perspective. I mean, why do we accept things that we accept? Why do we accept in the marketplace bad things? Whether it's corruption, clearly that's so wrong. See, stealing, whatever. But we also accept bullying. We also expect things that are never in the, just never in line with our own biblical sort of perspective. So may we all challenge those, and may we find ways to challenge it without being perhaps too destructive. And as I get older, I like to think I'm still challenging some basic sort of things that I think is wrong, but I do challenge it slightly more politely sometimes now.
But Bernard, this does raise an interesting kind of follow-on thought. It's very clear. As believers, we are instructed to always, it's no choice, always operate in love, empathy, EQ, etc. But how do we balance that with leaders needing to make tough decisions? And I know as we all have to do it, sometimes those tough decisions have impacts on the lives of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. How do you as a kingdom leader balance making tough decisions as a leader, but balancing that with what the word of God says, we've got to operate in love?
On your knees. That's how you have to make those decisions, Now, I've learned to consult widely. I've learned to take other people's views into consideration. I've learned to really live in hope and think that if we do this and that, then we can actually impact on the situation. And then there are still times, and as you've introduced my CV, I'm from the gold mining industry, and our business model was to take gold mines that were no longer viable and try and give them a second chance, And in that, we have done many retrenchments, layoffs. And I honestly think if you act, in that sort of like, is this the best possible solution? Have I spent time searching my heart? Have I spent time praying about this? You take those tough decisions. And again, Dorian, obviously in many lives, that's an impact, but it's then an opportunity for each one of those people to deal with that sort of situation. And Tracey is always amazed when somebody comes up to me and said, you know what, you retrenched me at Elandsrand, and it was the best thing because from that day on, this and this and this happened. Now, I'm not saying that makes the decision any different, but again, we are not God, so we play the hand that we have got to play according to what is possible at the point in time. And then it's amazing how that, I really think that's the only way one can take those sort of tough decisions. But on your knees is really the way to do that. There's no other wisdom than that.
Tracey, one of the comments that has come through is that your book has had a profound impact on many people. And I can certainly agree with this comment. I've been through a process with you where you've led us as leadership teams in different contexts. And I think I've been through more than one. It just helped us to think through what it means to be a good leader and how to make good leadership decisions. And one of the key things that I'm always kind of also weighing up is good leaders are meant to be both decisive but participative. Isn't that a contradiction in terms?
I don't think so, Dorian. Firstly, I just want to thank you and whoever made the comments. You have no idea how encouraging it is when you're busy writing another book to have that input. So thank you very much. I think that what you need to do is, I think that those two things have to work together depending on the context and the situation. I think the worst kind of leadership is, where we're too participative and nobody feels like there's any direction. I think it's about where you need to be decisive. So decisive in terms of the future. I don't think it's a participative discussion about, if you're going on a family holiday and you decide you're going to Cape Town and you get in the car and you're driving there. I mean, you're not going to be asking your family, like, are you like happy that we, so that's where it doesn't work. And if you get the ratio or the mix of that wrong, I think you end up going around and around and around in circles. So I think it's about really being clear about where you want to go, and getting participation in terms of how you're going to go about getting there.
Bernard, one more question here for you. You indicated that as you reflect on the businesses that you're involved in, some of them may have to close. What advice would you give small and medium-sized businesses that are hitting tough times right now? What is it that you would advise them to start thinking about, or to focus on? What should they be reflecting on when they make decisions about workforce and
So the world is constantly changing. I don't know on which industrial revolution we are, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th. The point is it will continue to change. And in that process, I think it's on us, and especially on smaller businesses, to reinvent ourselves regularly. And I have to honestly tell you, if I ran a tourist business, a bed and breakfast type business, I would have thought I'm in a sweet spot in South Africa. Beautiful South Africa. Tourism is a policy the government gets and supports. And overnight, you've got no income. So now what? And that now what is where really, I think it becomes personal, individual. What's God's calling on my life? And then, Dorian, I mean, as you know, because you recently suggested that I'm going to read the book Doing Business God's Way by Dennis Peacock. And one of the profound things that he says is that, God provides the resources for what he wants us to do. So again, I mean, if we should walk in faith, but God also gave us the ability to plan, to think, and to contemplate. I don't know how different the world will be post the lockdown, the worldwide lockdown. But certainly, some businesses were a lot more vulnerable than what we thought they were. I mean, you will all know that I'm very involved in the small business space, and there are many businesses that will have to reinvent themselves. And obviously, that's what entrepreneurs do. But not all small business owners are entrepreneurs. And the entrepreneurs sit and they see opportunities in this sort of disruption. But it's not easy. I mean, it takes tenacity, it takes commitment. Obviously, it takes resources, and that may ultimately be where for a lot of people it's different. But if your business is going to see no revenue for the next 18 months, perhaps it's not a business anymore. I mean, as harsh as it is, the meteorite strike, and perhaps your business was indeed one of the dinosaurs. I mean, these are tough words, but I mean, I certainly am experiencing that myself. I mean, some of our businesses are just not fit for what will be post this, and then one has to be decisive. Huh?
Bernard, and I think you're right, and I think that, but this is where I think we have the benefit, because what we understand is that who we are is not our business. Our business reflects who we are, but it is not who we are. What are those skills? What are those talents? What are those gifts that had made your business successful before? And how do I now direct those into a way that can meet a new need?
Very well.
And I believe God's going to give us the creativity to find that. I mean, just the other day, I heard about a physiotherapist that's gone online. Let's just think about that for a second. A physiotherapist. Come on, you've got to be kidding, Dorian. She treats children. Gets on Zoom like this, and she says, and she gets the parents, and then she, with the doll, she demonstrates to the parents what they should be feeling for and how they should be manipulating the various joints on their kids. Now, that didn't come by that physiotherapist sitting in a corner moping. I don't know whether she's a born-again believer or not, but she said to herself, my world has changed. What skills do I have? How do I get that to somebody who needs it? And I think we're going to pray before we go tonight. We're going to pray that God's going to give us the creativity as marketplace leaders to figure out how to take those skills, those gifts, those abilities, and redirect them in such a way that we can see it can meet a new need, that we can touch lives. Because God's plan and purpose hasn't evaporated because of COVID-19.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, folks, before we pray, I'm wondering if there's any closing remarks from either of you. And, there might be more questions. And if there are more questions and we didn't get to them, guys, we apologize. But please, afterwards, when the video is uploaded, we will put the presentation up as well. So if you missed some of those points that Bernard was referring to or Tracey was referring to, we'll put the presentation in the description as well. We'll show you where you can access it. We'll put the contact details of the people on there as well. But, and of course, we'll be back again next week. But Bernard, Tracey, I just wanted to say thank you so much. It has been so rich. I almost can't believe that a whole hour has gone by already. But please, any closing thoughts or closing remarks before we sign off this evening?
My wife has to have the last word, so I will just quickly, in conclusion, say that this is truly the time to show that you care as a leader. You may naturally do that, but now we have to do it and very differently. And I wish I could just share with people, or I wish every leader could understand how they are being watched. In other words, what we do speaks so loud that nobody can hear our words sometimes. And I think with those two sort of basic concluding principles, I think it's an amazing time to be called to be in a leadership position. Thank you, Dorian.
Sure. Tracey, as you speak, I'm just going to put up a slide that just shows your book and how people can contact you if they need to. So that's up. But Trace, please, your closing thoughts.
So thanks, Dorian. I think for me, it would be to turn up the volume on some very simple things. Thank you. Celebrate people. Even if people do the smallest thing, celebration and recognition is what gives people energy. So let's put energy and effort into noticing those things and telling people about it. We often don't tell people. We often think, oh, that was great, but we must tell people. And then the last one is to really, really listen. I think that's a lot of connection is made by listening to people, not solving their problem, but hearing them, where they're coming from. So turn up the volume on all three of those.
Thank you, guys. I think this just went so much deeper than even I thought we were going to go this evening. I'm blown away. I'm encouraged. I'm excited. I've got a list of things that I want to start doing more of, and a list of things I know I need to be doing less of. Kingdom leadership, I think we've touched on all of the aspects. It's serving. How we do it is we serve. How we do it is we love. Why we do it, it's because it's not about us. It's about God and his plan and his purpose, not only for our lives, but those people whose lives we are leading as well. And recognizing that he's got a plan and a purpose and a destiny for them too. And so I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. We're going to leave some of these slides up. We'll leave the video rolling a bit longer. So if you want any of the information, this is Tracey's book, The Leadership Riptide. Highly recommended. I'm sure it's available online in many different locations, and certainly it could be available in the bookshops when you manage to get back out to those again. And these are Tracey's Facebook page, Twitter account, and her website. Guys, have a look at that. If you have a leadership team that needs some authentic leadership interactions, then I would highly recommend Tracey. And she didn't ask me to say that, but when I've experienced it for myself, I know that I can. Folks, thank you. Please, if you want to be if you want to know when we're up again, we'll be up again next Monday. Hit the subscribe button. You'll be informed of what the topics are going to be. If you hit the bell, you'll also be notified of when that's going to take place. And we'll be back again next week at 8 p.m. And we're going to be ready to discuss the next topic in line with where God's taking us as marketplace leaders. And I'm still mulling through a couple of thoughts. There's a couple of directions we might go, which is why I don't have a topic for you yet this evening, but in the next day or two. You'll also see on the top of our Every Nation, the Marketplace Forum on the YouTube channel, you'll see Twitter account, Facebook and Instagram. whichever is your social media platform of choice, click that, and that will be another way that we can just keep you informed about what's happening. So Bernard and Tracey, thank you so much. We appreciate you guys, and God bless you. And we look forward to, look, it's great knowing that we can access you even though you're on your farm in Limpopo, but we do look forward to the time where we can hug you properly.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Dorian,
everyone,
thank you
for
for this
watching.
amazing platform.
Yeah.
Eh? Thank you.
Wonderful. Guys, God bless you. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Good night.
Cheers.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.